This is going to be a response to Tito Mboweni's tweets, which I think do deserve a response and do deserve digging into, because there are so many layers of intellectual dishonesty and uh, weird kinds of Machiavellian rhetorical sophistry going on here, which is really characteristic of the toxic power dynamic in South Africa, of corrupt political elites, essentially, which Tito Mboweni is providing cover for with this kind of ideological scapegoating. But also using the concept of non-racialism uh, to actively engage in this kind of ideological scapegoating and race baiting. Anyway, let me dig into it. So these are his. These I'm going to read out probably about 5 tweets from him. So this is the first one on the 10th of February. Increasingly, it seems to me, but may be obvious, that our non-racial dream is not embraced by the majority of white South Africans. True or not? Question mark. If true, what is the substitute of non-racialism, philosophically and politically? Uh, as if somehow white South Africans have any kind of political pull or influence, as a minority, essentially. So, I mean, what does this even mean? I mean, this is almost a kind of, I mean, this is a ploy. I mean, in some sense, a lot of this is subtle propaganda for white genocide and comes from a deeply racialist consciousness and racial ideology, throwing non-racialism under the bus while continuing to discredit it, which has been, in essence, what the ANC has done all along, destroying meritocracy in this country, destroying institutions, and having any... Because non-racialism is not a dream. Okay, he does talk about dreams in this tweet. Non-racialism is not a dream. It's a moral reality. It's a practice. It's something that you do. It's not something that comes as the means are justified by the ends. Non-racialism is not a goal to achieve. It is something that you practice, and it has not been practiced by the ruling party, by the ruling party's ideology and its disgusting and deplorable racialist demagoguery, essentially, which this is more essentially demagogic semantic wordplay, where non-racialism has been reinterpreted, where it has already been betrayed by institutionalized corruption in the law itself. That everything becomes justified through the filter of the means are justified by the ends. So you can put in racialist legislation that destroys a meritocracy, that undermines the integrity of people's credentials, and somehow that's white supremacy. So you can just freely project on the majority of white people from your vulnerable narcissism and from your crypto-ethno-fascism. And that's fine for you to do, Tito Mboweni, and to subtly subvert the concept of non-racialism, subtly subvert the settlement, the democratic settlement in this country, all because your vulnerable narcissism demands it. Because in some sense, I think what he ends up describing as white supremacy is the natural disdain for him as a member of the ruling party, as part of an organization that has disempowered the poor in this country, using nice sounding concepts like non-racialism as an excuse to engage in the worst kind of economic gerrymandering, the worst kind of, I mean, they have gutted and hollowed out all kind of organic and fluid integrity within our society, essentially, forcing everyone to adopt a toxic racialist interpretation as the ends are justified by the means, because non-racialism is no longer a moral reality and a practice. It is somehow a goal to be achieved, and you can do anything on the way to get there. And if you don't get on the government's political partisan version of that, which is the engine of corruption and crypto cronyism packaged in this crypto-fascistic language and semantic word gameplay, which to my mind, is very Machiavellian. I mean, Tito Mboweni really shows himself out to be in the cult of black ethno-fascism, and that he can just use his anecdotal relativism that, because he feels that he's not respected by enough people, that somehow that means that he's up against white supremacy, rather than he's up against the damage and the destruction done in the history from his quarter, from his ideological quarter, because they are impervious to accountability. So non-racialism is a shield for political accountability, essentially, and everyone who disagrees with him, he can slander as a white supremacist. This is implicit propaganda for white genocide. Anyway, let me go into the other quotes. So Tito Mboweni goes on to say, the majority, in brackets not all, of white South Africans seem at face value to still view black people as hewers of wood and drawers of water, equal servants. Equal sign. Sorry, I'm just... and then the next quote is, at the core of this is the question of race, class, gender, and power. The colonialism of a special type will take long to resolve. Remember that the majority, in brackets not all, white people thought of themselves as the civilizing contingent in Africa. Emphasis is on not all. I mean, like, really. Oh, so you give us your scraps of not all of us are collectively shamed and collectively guilty from this so-called crime of colonialism. I mean, this is utter racial myth-making. What about the colonialism of the crypto-fascist elite that use the poor as a human shield, that have wasted 20 years of development, and who take no responsibility for the lack of empowerment and development of the country as they continue to peddle racialist policy, racialist solutions that have no measurable utility, that have essentially indemnified themselves because somehow, well, we're going to arrive at it, and then when we don't arrive at it, we just slander and scapegoat a minority in the population because they've been able to hold on to some extent to their middle class status, as the middle class has essentially shrunk, and a whole generation is missing because, oh yeah, that's how good white privilege is in South Africa, that you have a missing generation. I mean, the amount... And what's disgusting is that this is a minister of the government is saying these things and blithely projecting this ideological scapegoating and race baiting while continuing to discredit non-racialism because somehow they are the poster child for non-racialism. They are the avatar of non-racialism, where nothing can be further from the truth. These people have destroyed non-racialism in practice, and then they claim to be agents of non-racialism as they continue to peddle their disgusting and toxic racial consciousness as their racial policy destroys a liberal functioning organic economy that can actually have small and medium businesses that don't have to deal with the premium on black professional labor because of all this tokenism and headhunting which is, mandated by the government through quotas. So we've never had an authentic organic economy that could actually develop its lower rung of the ladder. We've never been able to do that, as they have essentially used toxic identity consciousness as the intervention of an economy so that it can never get off the ground, so that it can never actually organically have real institutional integrity, and people can actually use the market and see each other equally within the market, which would be the most non-racializing force possible as well, is that you have organic meritocracy. And then you also government does its proper job, which is that they focus on supply, they focus on bursaries, they focus on high quality education, and they are judged on being able to deliver those things. But they don't have to do that because they can just complain about white supremacists and lowering the standards and making an uneven racial, they make an uneven playing field in order to compensate for the supposed evil history which they are part of corrupting and making worse and promoting more disempowerment, essentially, as they make this disgusting projection onto other people the only thing to be complained about, that if white South Africans aren't willing to call their privilege racism, then they're not on board with non-racialism. I mean, this is the betrayal and reinterpretation of non-racialist morality and values, as they have converted non-racialism, instead of being a moral program and a practice, they have converted it into somehow an end which can justify any means. And if people don't get on board with that project, because somehow, I mean, these are people who really believe that there is a governmental prerogative and they can do whatever the fuck they want with no political accountability just because they hold power, and they are complacent and they are fundamentally ideologically corrupt. So they believe that their ideology holds reality completely, and they can do whatever they want with it. And they can define semantically whoever the fuck they want to define as white supremacists, as when they are the racists. But you know, they can. Okay, let me just continue to read. One of the fundamental political questions we had to deal with during the struggle against apartheid, in brackets, not white people but the system, was how to build a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist and prosperous South Africa. That dream is as relevant today as it was before. Keep the faith. I mean, as if the Minister of Finance in the ruling party is somehow saying that as if civil society has been the block to development and empowerment and transformation. I mean, this is utterly, you know, this is why, I mean, if this is what you brand as non-racialism, if this kind of ideology and thinking is what you brand as non-racialism, obviously that version of non-racialism is non-existent, because it doesn't semantically even make sense. It doesn't hold any water. I mean, this is just utter. I mean, do you have no shame, Tito Mboweni? Do you have absolutely no shame? You know, someone with political power who then gets to create their own house of mirrors, and you know, I mean, this is like a fantasy land of some kind of. This is ideological demagoguery of the worst kind. I mean, this is latently. Let me just continue to read this massacre of the truth and justice, and basic concepts of decency and standards of morality. The disappointment, though, is that the majority, not all of white people, have not embraced non-racialism or accepted the olive branch offered by the ANC. They remain caught up in the white supremacy mentality. Sad, I deal with this every day. Well, maybe you're dealing instead actually with the disdain of people for the fact that you're part of a corrupt organization that has no political accountability for its actions. And because people don't stroke your ego and they don't sing your praises, and they give you a feeling that they feel dejection towards you, and that perhaps you should feel dejected. You should be crestfallen being part of such a mafia style of political, you know, autocratic complacency where you get to perform this kind of scapegoating, this kind of disgusting propaganda for genocide, essentially, where you say, oh, okay, well, it's not us that's let down the non-racialist project by essentially destroying meritocracy and by undermining the integrity of institutions and credentials, by undermining the labor market and forcing people to relate to each other through the toxic, because we're not willing to, as a government, instead of trying to promote the things that we want, we'll just mandate the things that we want, and other people just have to absorb the cost of that while also absorbing the toxic. How are people supposed to relate to each other when someone who shouldn't be promoted gets promoted? How are we supposed to deal with that when people can't do their own job? When, for example, the public protector is a huge example of this. Someone who has essentially no credibility or no integrity to even be responsible, for the acts of their office, of their high office. When you have such huge examples of this, and that's supposed to be a token of non-racialism. No. That's a token of crypto-ethno-fascism. That's a token of deep toxic racialism, which Tito Mboweni is certainly a proponent of. He is a toxic, cryptic racialist, and he uses the language of non-racialism to disguise his ideological corruption. The next, this I think is the last tweet on these sorts of issues. South Africa takes this non-racialism thing for granted. there is a detailed theoretical, philosophical, sociological, political, economic, and reality check basis for our negotiated settlement. We were not fools or sellouts. We had to negotiate to get here. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but essentially, yeah, where we are now belongs to the ANC and belongs to their corruption and their own discrediting and mislabeling of what the disgusting things that they do as non-racialism. But they have betrayed the Constitution. The judges themselves, believing in identity politics, have also betrayed the letter of the Constitution, as they have had to invent things like a governmental prerogative to cover over their corruption. I mean, essentially, that's what non-racialism now translates into, is that the ANC government has a prerogative to do whatever the hell they want to support the, inverted commas, the dream of non-racialism. Non-racialism has been converted from a practice, from a moral reality, into a future condition in which you can do whatever you want in order to arrive at that future condition. So, I mean, he's conflated, let's say, the word transformation or empowerment or development. He's converted non-racialism with development, because he can't talk about non-racialism because he doesn't know what the hell non-racialism is. Non-racialism is the magic source that allows him to package and repackage the ANC as being a good actor, as having good faith about anything, where they have essentially used the good faith around the concept of non-racialism for corruption, for overt corruption and overt scapegoating as well, where they can say, well, if you don't have the right feelings about us as a government, then you have repudiated non-racialism. I mean, this is disgusting partisan hackery. I mean, this is propaganda for genocide. I would say that these are war criminals in the making. If there is a calamity in this country because of disgusting political rhetoric from Tito Mboweni, these people should be in jail for constitutional damages. You know, this is part of the academic crypto-fascist cult that, you know, have leveraged identity politics and have undermined constitutional values and the structure of the Constitution, the morality of the Constitution, in order to supply enough journalists to essentially give enough backing for the judges that have corrupted the interpretation of the law and installed this institutional corruption that entrenches the ANC political prerogative or the governmental prerogative. And by the way, if you're going to give the government some kind of prerogative over the Constitution, which is absolutely insane, because there's no mention of a governmental prerogative in the limitations clause. So if you want to get into any kind of affirmative action and you want to make affirmative action policy, which has to be read in connection with the limitations clause, you know, every policy that infringes anyone's rights, and equality is always a practice of measuring rights, you have to always justify infringement. And you can't just say, well, we have a governmental prerogative to design anything that we want to design. It has to be effective. You have to practically test the policy to see if it actually produces development. But instead, all it does is produce toxic identity consciousness. That is what we have grown in this country. The ANC has been able to shrink the economy, destroy businesses, destroy the fundamental integrity of credentials within a society. And instead, we have grown toxic racial consciousness. That has been the only thing that has grown in this country because of the ANC's ideological corruption. And then they double down and they say, well, because you're not agreeing with the corruption of what we have rebranded as non-racialism, then we'll call you a white supremacist. And then you have enough of these people who give themselves the permission to talk down to people, from their high position of government minister to judge a whole segment of the population because of their projection, because of their vulnerable narcissism, when they should feel crestfallen. The status and the integrity of their office, they should feel bad. I mean, do you have no shame? Do you have no accountability? I mean, look, I understand that the ANC is a large circus tent of a lot of different ideological themes happening within it. But these kinds of signals, these kinds of messages, I mean, they are blatantly racist. They are covertly racist, and they come essentially from someone who has cottoned on to this movement, because this is how you get points in this new normalized crypto-fascistic political arena, where you have normalized this kind of racialist matrix, where moral consideration is vested in the identity. That essentially, if you're not speaking on behalf of the identitarian group, then you have no ground to stand on. If you're not sticking up for the racial group, then whatever you say, we have completely destroyed normative morality because of this kind of normalization, where it's all identity race politics. So someone who clearly is a racialist thinker, who then uses even the concept of non-racialism purely for race baiting. I mean, this is just clear race baiting. And he, with no shame, that he will even use the concept of non-racialism, which he clearly does not understand. And he will rebrand it as, well, because we do this in the name of non-racialism, never mind that we don't give a shit about what what non-racialism actually is in practice. We don't give a shit about it, but because we can label what we do as non-racialism and then use it against anyone who detracts us and who criticizes us as a government, as someone who seems to be undeserving of their position if they don't understand these basic things that our country is founded on, but also they don't understand the shape of the kind of corruption that the ANC and toxicity has been a part of breeding this new form of identity consciousness and toxic racialism. I mean, which they now have redoubled down and, which they claim to be non-racialist. I mean, it's just crazy. So, I mean, I guess they will call me a white supremacist because I actually am a non-racialist and I don't get into their sympathy enforcement and sympathy demands with their projection onto people, where they can speak for other people's personal thoughts, that they can mind read other people. I mean, like, what is he talking about? He's talking about an anecdotal, relativistic, subjective point of view, which he gives himself the ability to just indulge in. I mean, this is like Hitler complaining about the Jews. This is like the Jewish conspiracy against the Aryan people. This is the same level of politics as Weimar Germany. Because in Weimar Germany, even before the Nazis took over, they were teaching Aryan studies to all the children. That is what we are doing. We're teaching race and gender studies to all the children by these disgusting academics that deserve to be in jail for their constitutional damages and their propaganda against the Constitution. But no, it's all been normalized. And as the law has become institutionally corrupted to reflect this reinterpretation of constitutional values and reinterpretation of constitutional rights, as the limitations clause has been completely steamrolled by jurisprudence that was imported by the corrupt legal tradition in America, because American legal scholars came here and told the judges and told the policymakers in government that they could essentially invent this concept of the governmental prerogative, that as long as you have a legitimate government purpose and it's rational, hypothetically rational, never mind that it's rational in practice, then you can say that you have a governmental prerogative and it's covered by a governmental prerogative. I mean, this is utterly insane. There is no accountability to the Constitution, and there is no accountability to normative morality, which is why we now live, essentially, I mean, the Constitution is dead. The question is, can it be resurrected in this, new time of crypto-fascism? I mean, it's deplorable. It's disgusting. I mean, there is. This is why this ideological corruption is what enforces and keeps big business entrenched, because it's protected by all this red tape, so that you can never have small and medium businesses competing with them. And then why then government can always try to extort these big players into redistributive, virtue signaling and projects and things like that, while the small business owner will never be able to actually have a vibrant, liberal, open, organic economy, because their labor will always be stolen from them. It'll always be headhunted because of the ideological premium given to this racial tokenism. So, you can never retain your labor because you can't afford the premium after you give someone experience, if they are of a certain color, they will just be headhunted. You know, you can't have an economy like this. You can't have a labor market. I mean, the labor market has no functioning within it, you know, and the market is where actually liberal values are generated, and where non-racialism is the most clear, because, you know, you make business decisions that are based on the bottom line. And government with intelligent intervention, intelligent on the supply side of making sure that the right things are in place to create proper incentives, where you don't mandate that people employ people, you create some kind of subsidy, or you create some kind of bursary that tries to actually focus on development, that actually says, well, these people don't have this kind of skill, or these people are missing something, therefore government tries to provide it and pay for the provision of it, and then when it's actually received, when the disadvantage has been specifically ameliorated, then you stop the program, because the program actually has performed transformation. Then you actually have programs that are actively capable of making tangible differences, and you can measure the success of the program, rather than just having these huge mandates which essentially allow the top of every society. They don't target disadvantage. When you just have blind mandates to racial color, to skin color, you end up essentially parachuting people who are already middle class, who are already in the black elite. You just help the black elite even more. You're not even attending to disadvantage. And this is why we have this toxic racial consciousness, because we have a whole generation of people who are effectively vulnerable narcissists, who have been told that they are allowed to be narcissistic around their narcissistic injury, which is supposedly their identity, their racial identity. And so we have these people using the word non-racialism when they are effectively nothing like non-racialists. They are toxic racialists who get to essentially use this tool, this instrument for their Machiavelli. I mean, they are actually, we have a whole generation now of essentially these people who are like fascists, essentially. They are all psychopaths, sociopaths, and Machiavellian, where they have used the language of morality and the language of victimology, essentially, to entrench themselves in being able to extract resources parasitically from other people, and call that extraction, that parasitic extraction, non-racialism. And they can use ideological scapegoating if anyone stops them from that form of parasitic extraction. And this is the problem, and then we have these people like Tito Mboweni who will actually put the line down strictly. They will actually make this stringent, bold-faced claim, which, as far as I can see, is very clearly propaganda for white genocide. I mean, it's not overt, because he hasn't talked about violence, but I mean, he's undermined the constitutional values. He clearly doesn't understand non-racialism, but he continues to lie about it. I mean, okay, perhaps I can give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he's not philosophically or politically minded, so he doesn't know about this stuff. I mean, he's a business person. Maybe he'll listen to this. Maybe he'll get this message. Maybe it'll get through his thick skull. Maybe he'll perhaps realize, oh, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't just project onto other people from my vulnerable narcissism, from my covert narcissism. I should actually self-reflect. I should actually be humble about my own sense of that my worldview ideology is not the only way of looking at these things, and when I get this feedback from people, it's not that I can just brand them as white supremacists, but I can actually track these things on a deeper level, on a personable level. Why do these people have these beliefs that I brand as white supremacy? Why do they have this disdain for me? Is there another explanation for this disdain other than just labeling it as white supremacy and saying that if everyone doesn't endorse me and my position and my politics, then they are effectively white supremacists? But I mean, it's this kind of cherry picking. It's this kind of, that somehow you can live in a reality tunnel, but other people's reality tunnel somehow, has no justification because you're allowed to have your narcissistic injury. and other people's narcissistic injury about the recent history of the ANC's corruption, which they don't know how to synthesize into a clear non-racialist because and whose fault is it that these people have not been able to transition into full non-racialism? Whose fault is it that there are white people that haven't been able to grow in their non-racialist mentality? It's the ANC's fault, especially because they have rebranded what they do as non-racialism. So if you want to know why non-racialism has diminished in this country, it's because, and I'm not victim blaming, it is because of the corrupt policy of the ANC and the corrupt cultural toxicity that they have promulgated by their racial identity mongering, selling people their own identity and access to their own identity as the only source of moral fortitude or something like that. So, I mean, there are lots of psychological aspects to this, but essentially when you have this kind of disgusting racial consciousness, what it means is that you can freely convert envy. If you as a person, as you as an individual feel envious about anything else, you can say that no, it's not envy. It is jealousy that something that is deserved by my identity has been taken away from my identity. Something that should belong to my identity. My identity is I was going to say self-righteously, but I should just say my identity is righteously deserving of something that has been taken away from it. Therefore, it's not envy as me as an individual. It's jealousy that belongs to the identity. And that is basically what fascist politics is it's being able to convert the individual narcissistic injury into an identitarian jealousy. And anyone who disagrees with that and is confused about the moves that you have made, you get to basically just loudspeaker over them and you get to talk down to them. And once you've got politics like that, you don't have liberal politics anymore because you don't have any kind of accountability. Because that mechanism is so toxic, is so paradoxical, is so self-insulated. It's basically a form of autism or solipsism, but the solipsism is not based around, it's connected from the individual to the identity. So it's a solipsistic identity that you belong to. This is why people who don't agree with you lose their race. You know, what about Big Daddy Liberty that doesn't agree with you, Tito Mboweni? What about him? So is he not black then? Is he a black white supremacist? You know, you get into stupid shit like this when you get into this disgusting racialist politics and this crypto-fascism, Tito Mboweni. But I'll just say that, you know, people should be accountable for their actions. And you know, justice has been sold out. You know, it says, we are not fools or sellouts. Yeah, I mean, I agree that you're not a fool. I think that you're Machiavellian. I think, I think that you're a sellout on the concept of morality, on the concept of justice. But I mean, I see, this is the thing, is that maybe I'm willing to say that if Tito Mboweni would listen to this, perhaps he would cotton on to what I'm saying, if he perhaps hasn't heard the other side so explicitly. But there is a fundamental bad faith in his position. People know when they're trading off this envy for jealousy. They know when they're using this gimmick inside themselves. They know when they're relying on the scapegoating, when you can just project on the outside to cover over doing this very dark and grimy kind of horse trading, where you're saying, no, it's not that I'm envious that other people have respect that I don't have, and I can actually ask, well, why don't I have respect? Why don't people respect me more? Why am I not respected by more segments of the population? And I actually go asking for that and go look and searching for that. Instead, I can just label and project and pretend to mind read other people and to just call them white supremacists. Rather than the idea that you could actually be humble around that there is actually something missing in your sense of integrity, that your integrity is something that has not been vindicated. You don't have a justified integrity. You're part of a mafia corruption, essentially. and you have abused moral language, you have abused the concept of non-racialism. But I mean, this is the problem with their ideology, is that individuals don't own their own integrity, because in some sense they can just always use their identity as a human shield. They can say, no, 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 somehow if you don't respect me, it's because you hate poor black people. These are corrupt elites who are saying that if you don't give me the dignity that I expect, if you don't give me the level of pride and regard that I demand, then essentially it's because you don't respect poor black people. I mean, this is the most conspicuous kind of ideological corruption I can think of, where you have people with all the power and money using the poor as a human shield, who control politics from the top and then get to administer unjustly this kind of Machiavellian social jerry-rigged, sort of shared blame, collective blame, and in some sense threaten collective punishment for not getting on board with your version of politics. I mean, essentially it assumes that there is no more political, liberal, democratic politics anymore. That there's just the ANC. And the ANC's governmental prerogative. And they get to define what words mean. And if someone from the ANC labels someone as a white supremacist, then, they have to justify how they can still be a non-racialist in order to still have breathing room. Otherwise, I mean, it's just crazy how all the failings of the ANC government are shamelessly diverted by Tito Mboweni, who is literally a minister of the government, of the ruling party. It's conspicuously disgusting. I mean, but anyway, I mean, this, all I can say is that, you can hope that in another paradigm that the hellfire of true justice will rain down at some point on the souls of these corrupt people. In some sense, you can only hope that the justice that comes from higher powers will come and reclaim the damage that has been done to what was a space-aged legal system with a space-aged constitution with amazing morality, which has been slowly hollowed out and undermined by this racialist project and its vulnerable narcissism of people who have destroyed and hollowed out the democratic revolution and then doubled down on their disgusting corruption by using it as fuel. So they have engineered the failure. They have made it a self-fulfilling prophecy of their own failure, and then they have used that failure as a political weapon against their detractors. It's disgusting. I mean, that's politics, that's fascist politics 101, I guess, is that you can never be wrong and you can always just dictate reality to people. It just shows you how, I mean, these are people perhaps that understand things from a psychological perspective. They don't understand things from a deep political, ideological perspective, but they have gotten onto the bandwagon because enough academics and enough journalists have been promoting this crypto-fascist politics for too long now, and we got the identity politics coming from America, who they never understood. I mean, that's what happens when you've got American legal scholars who teach you their fascistic legal positivism, and they don't give a damn about non-racialism. They never did. They were always disgusting racialists. They always believed in identity politics without even having to perform the kind of lip service to non-racialism that Tito Mboweni name dropped. In some sense, Tito Mboweni is certainly not giving lip service to non-racialism other than the fact that he just mentions it. I mean, he's just literally mentioning it as he's literally throwing it under the bus and using it to race bait. I mean, it's crazy when the morality of non-racialism is actually used as the method of race baiting. I guess, but this is the purest manifestation of the convoluted and the kinds of intellectual conflations that are made in order to create a disgusting position that cannot be falsified. You can't. How would you falsify what Tito Mboweni is saying in his own terms, in his own reality tunnel? You can't confront what he is saying. It's self-satisfying because it's so entrenched in its own racialist assumptions. He is an identitarian, essentially, foremost. He's an identitarian before he is a non-racialist. And so his non-racialism is, well, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's not a value that he actually holds. I mean, it's what he calls the end point of his ideology. It's what he calls the destination. It's a dream for him. Non-racialism is only a dream. It's not a practice. It's not a moral reality. So, I mean, these are people who never understood the equality clauses in the Constitution, and they never understood the limitations clause. Perhaps they didn't read it carefully enough. I mean, it does require somewhat of a legal mind, perhaps, because that is, in some sense, the most complicated aspect of the Constitution. But the government is always vulnerable to being taken up on the limitations clause, and the idea that now they have invented these ad hoc ways to duck the limitations clause. I mean, that's why we live in the country that we live, with the corrupt policy and the corrupt and the never-ending corruption, with this kind of disgusting, toxic ideological disguise and cover. Anyway, I'm just repeating myself now. Let me stop this recording. I mean, this is the moral corruption which underpins all the corruption in this country. The problem in this country is not even the economic corruption or the stealing or the theft. It's the corruption in the policy itself. It's the moral and the political morality that encapsulates it. So it is. The real corruption in this country is the moral corruption, which is being voiced explicitly by Tito Mboweni. This is quite funny. I just wanted to add, I mean, I did actually want to make responding tweets to this, but I mean, not that would really matter much, because they already have 1,400 replies, which sadly I can't read. You can't just click on them and read on them, or I don't know how to use Twitter, I guess, but I mean, I used Twitter probably years ago or something like that, but I can't use Twitter because I've been suspended. I wonder if that's because somehow the algorithm on some other website knows what I do or something like that, or my politics has already been flagged. I guess, but I mean, this is quite disgusting. That I guess we have this public debate perhaps on websites like this. And they get to ideologically cleanse their detractors from the forums of discourse and public discourse. I mean, this is how I guess crypto-fascism really does. It's a cultural toxicity, and I guess we've already betrayed liberal values. I mean, with disgusting companies like Twitter that get to create their ideological echo chambers, but it's the requisite private power that gets empowered by state ideology and sort of creates this reality tunnel which is shared and protected by both sides, and you get this kind of rock and a hard place until you can't speak out. Well, I mean, there's limited opportunity for me, I guess. I mean, probably already throttled on, well, I guess, I mean, I can't know that I'm big enough that I could be throttled, but I mean, independent creators are, as a general class, have been throttled on YouTube, but I guess you could just say that that's at least an across-the-board business decision, perhaps, that they're trying to convert YouTube into a conduit for mainstream messages and sort of as has been called in certain languaging, the Blue Church by Jordan Hall, that the Blue Church is trying to regain institutional sort of narrative spell casting sort of centrality, that they need the center of power that is connected with the political elites and the money power and behind these sorts of things need to be lockstep and capable of reaching the ear of the general population. I mean, what's crazy in this country is just how essentially I would say this morality of identity politics gives the journalists enough to distract the common people about, because they can just continue to go on about identity politics, that actual governmental accountability and accountable policy just never gets analyzed, because you can always just scapegoat and complain about sections of the population not agreeing with you and not agreeing with your racialist consciousness and your disgusting projective morality. Where all the problems that you perceive can essentially somehow they belong to individual people, and government has loses all of its responsibility. It's disgusting as well, because you have this horrible inversion where essentially government is supposedly supposed to do what government is meant to provide, what businesses are actually there to do, and government mandates that businesses should do what government is supposed to do. It's a complete reversal of roles. That the public sector is meant to provide private sector goods and services, and the private sector is meant to be like a benevolent government. I mean, it's crazy. But I mean, this is how corrupt elites get to extract the most money from government. You get to burn the wick from both ends while you debauch the economy and destabilize it, and create this ideological identitarian interventionism that has to mediate all relations. It's exactly like, and so you can just completely subvert the functioning of the market, and you never have a healthy functioning market. And, this has all been normalized essentially by this disgusting American propaganda that in some sense is meant to demoralize liberal values. I mean, that's the whole sort of, this postmodern left-wing identitarian excuse is just sort of hidden convoluted Leninism in some sense, and this is just the destabilization, demoralization phase, which our country is so corrupt with its politics is happy to go along with, because it's a wonderful disguise and cover, because essentially there's no accountability for political elites, because they can just continue to virtue signal this morality play. And let me just also point out that if you're interested in these topics of the dark triad and victimology, I will just put a link to Sam Vaknin's video where he talks about the psychological research linking the dark triad traits to people who virtue signal, to people who care about, who are victims. There's a difference to saying I have been victimized and to saying I am a victim. I'm a victim of something. When you consider yourself a victim of something, and that, if that is how you identify yourself, you have already essentially created a morality play in which the narrative becomes unquestionable. And it's completely based on relativism, and you're not able to reality check yourself at all. I mean, you become a bad reality tester. You can't look at reality in a fair and balanced way. You've already got your assumptions built into things. So anyway, Sam Vaknin goes into that issue in the recording that I'll link attached to this. And I would say that is just, I would argue, an academic vindication of things that I've been complaining about for years. I mean, these papers that have come out in psychology, I think they are dated in 2020. But yeah, so anyway, I would say that they've caught up to me. But anyway, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, or I'm a different kind of psychological researcher, I'll just say that. But anyway.